Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this third webcast, part of the web series that we launched 2 weeks ago on how can blockchain foster reliable and sustainable supply chains. Last time we went through the traceability, product traceability and track and trace. This time on webcast number 3, we're focusing on the relationship between the buyers and their suppliers and all the stakeholders in the supply chain, and how to enhance transparency and accountability between those actors. I'm honored to be joined today and share the floor with Bahar Gidwani, who's co-founder of CSRHub. He will shed some light on this very strategic aspect of ESG dimension of any supplier screening or supplier understanding. And I think that's a very valuable piece of information for today, which positions the webcast spot on the notion of sustainability, which is critical those days. So it's part of a series of 5 webcasts, number 3 today. Next week will be automate procure to pay, another topic of how to reconcile in the supply chain the purchase order, the invoice, the goods received, so that there's more automation and better reconciliation. It's a critical step in this supply chain process. And the last one will be how to secure IoT devices, which inform a lot of the processes in the supply chain. You can refer to this as know your device. As we're going to talk today about know your supplier, there's another notion of knowing the device, making sure there's no fraud around the device. So comprehensive set of web around this topic of blockchain in the supply chain. So today, talking about the supply chain management and knowing your supplier, clearly, and that's a statement from the Harvard Business Review that a report I encourage all of you to read, which basically speaks about coronavirus as a wake-up call for supply chain management. And when you read into this, you see that there's this notion of supply network maps. Only a few companies have properly mapped their supply network with clean and clear and accurate information about all the suppliers, which give them an edge, an ability to react more quickly, to take decisions, to assess risk, production potentially, right in the middle of the crisis. So this notion of supply network map, which we see as very strategic those days, it's one of the key war room discussions across sectors, we thought was the central point of discussion for today. It all starts with the understanding sector by sector, company by company, of the complexity of the supply chain, from a buyer to suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We realized that it's very hard to very well know your suppliers in tier 2 and 3. You do not have information, it's not up to date, they're hard to reach. And it's even more complex to go deeper into different levels of your supply chain, level 2, 3, and N, to get to know what happens behind your suppliers and the suppliers of your suppliers, down to the grass. When we thought about last week, we spoke about the Nestle case. Our colleagues from AWS mentioned the critical notion of knowing the full chain from farm to fork. That's typically the complexity of how to go deeper into the levels of the supply chain. Now, knowing your supplier, you could refer to it as KYS, which is very close to the KYC that we know in the banking space. Know your customer, so know your supplier, we think is really more strategic than ever. And it's essentially, based on the discussions we've had with several of our clients, it's a very complex data management challenge. And we can relate it to 2 big trends in the supply chain management: the supplier relationship management and the supplier risk management combined. On the supplier relationship management, it's about onboarding of supplier, it's about procurement, refreshing the information on those suppliers, sending potentially update requests on a regular basis, essentially managing the life cycle of this relationship up to the performance management. So it's really about relationship management, how to properly connect, easily connect to your suppliers to get relevant information in real time. And there's this other dimension on the supply chain management, which is risk management, about all about alerting KPIs, monitoring risk, making sure you have a visibility over operational risk, to manage disruption, to manage quality, and potentially credit risk as well. And last but not least, and that's the whole purpose of having Bahar on the webcast today, there's a lot more than operational and credit. There's also the whole ESG dimension, environmental social governance dimension, which was already critical before the crisis and will become increasingly strategic as you do business with suppliers to get to know precisely how they rank, how they score, how they benchmark within a sector and across sectors on very specific criteria, potentially leading to certifications that can be provided by external data providers. All of this is a data management challenge because it's about building and maintaining a supplier profile with different attributes, general information, where is it located, what's the name, what's the legal entity identifier, what are the operation features, attributes, location of plants, manufacturing operations, warehouses, finance dimension, obviously, to assess credit risk and liquidity, and ESG, as I said. We believe, and that's based on a number of discussions we had with clients and based on our experience on managing as part of business services the supply chain of our clients, the ultimate solution should meet those following requirements. The first one is really to enable supplier data collection properly, making sure you respect privacy by design, because there's no way a supplier will share information, sensitive information, if he does not trust that you're going to use the information for the benefit of the buyer only. It should be an easy outreach. It should be easy to reach out to suppliers, and using email is probably not the best and most efficient solution. It should be user-friendly. It should be designed to avoid duplication of tasks. The supplier typically receive many questionnaires from many different buyers or even the same buyers throughout the year. And it is a nightmare. It is a hassle to duplicate those questionnaires, to re-answer again similar questions. So any solution should lead to avoiding duplication on that front, so that you once and for all put in place a profile and don't have to answer questions again. And obviously there should be the right degree of automation so that whenever a supplier updates information, it can be pushed automatically to the buyers. This is all good, but it requires adoption at scale in terms of breadth and depth into the supply chain. Some supply chain typically have 10,000. I've heard about 50,000 suppliers in some supply chains. So any solution should foster adoption at scale. And we believe that there are two big incentives or big contributors to acceleration of adoption. The first one is enabling the pre-filling or pre-populating of data to help suppliers and buyers build up their profile. And that's when you interface with external data sources, general data source or certifiers themselves, or ESG data source like CSRHub, so that you can enrich and complement and pre-fill information in addition to the information you receive directly from the supplier. And the other important dimension is to incentivize suppliers to collaborate, to share information, by offering them to passport the profile they put in place. They should be able to reuse what they've done and share it with other buyers. We call it passporting. Obviously, this is all about credentials that they potentially build on their profile with all the right certifications. And that builds credibility for them as a supplier to any other buyer, and that can be used on any RFI. And if all this is in place, it facilitates supply chain finance for banks deep into the supply chain. Assuming all this is in place, and again, it's a major data management and data sharing issue. Assuming you have all the right solution in place, then you can put in place alerting, risk monitoring, data visualization tools, so that you get a good control over what's happening in your supply chain. You can make decisions and take decisions accordingly, especially in those challenging times. Now, it's all about blockchain, those webcasts. And obviously, what I just described, those requirements are, we believe, uniquely addressed by a blockchain-based solution. Because when you think about the blockchain attributes, essentially distributed ledger technology attributes, in the B2B space, you very quickly come back to privacy concern can be addressed through this technology, guaranteeing ownership and control. You want to automate as much as possible whatever is manual processing in the supply chain to turn it into straight-through processing as much as possible, process automation. It's all about the smart contract and digitization of questionnaires. The lack of traceability, which is linked to the lack of trust that may happen in the supply chain, that's addressed through this end-to-end traceability that blockchain solution offer, and typically an end-to-end audit trail. Accountability is a big issue in the supply chain as well. You need to trust who sent you the information, who the identity. You need to be comfortable with the identity of your counterpart. So trusted identity is key, and verified credentials. And last but not least, it's really about getting your network connected, your supply chain network connected, so that you get the visibility across the whole ecosystem, which leads to the network mapping. And as you know, blockchain is a peer-to-peer technology which enables to synchronize, if you will, between parties in a complex ecosystem. So it's very well fitted for such complex ecosystem connectivity. It was designed for that. Now, we at Capgemini, with our partner R3 and leveraging the protocol Corda, we designed a solution, an asset that we have, which is called Blue Catalyst. It was designed to enable trusted data exchange in any B2B interaction, in any B2B network. and essentially, it's leveraging traceability, privacy, security, but essentially you need to think about it as a buyer or a supplier, two legal entities, transacting together, connected together. Well, they can all have their own vault of information and database. It's a secure database, which enables communication between the two, privately, securely, one-on-one. It's peer-to-peer. There's absolutely no sharing between these outside this relationship, so that you can guarantee strict privacy between the buyer and the supplier in any exchange of data. And you keep track through an audit trail, a tamper-proof audit trail. You can keep track of any exchange of data, information, structured data, unstructured data, even a questionnaire between the two. So essentially the features are, it enables direct outreach, direct connectivity. You can easily connect to whatever supplier in your supply chain. It brings to the supplier and the buyer what we call a vault ownership. Everyone has its database. It can store the data there. It's the only one to have access to the data. It's not a central utility model. Everyone is in control. It enables the passporting of data, by the way, to any other counterparty that you decide to share it with, consent-based. And finally, it's end-to-end tamper-proof audit trail. Now we've designed it for compliance, KYC, KYS, any traceability needed on any workflow, traceability, and procure to pay. So the whole process I mentioned at the beginning, which is if you want to track properly purchase order, invoice, and goods received. Very quickly, two, and we'd be happy to show you a demo if you need, but I'm mindful of the time. It enables two things, in this case, in the context of supply chain, a supplier onboarding, which is really connecting to your supplier, sending a questionnaire of data, typical questionnaire that you would fit your industry in the aerospace, the pharma, the banking, whatever. The supplier can answer the questions. There's no need to answer questions which have been answered already, so there's no duplication. And there's complete tracking of the answers between the two parties so that you keep an audit trail on both sides. And it enables the supplier to put in place a supplier profile, general information, operations, finance, ESG, and you can pre-fill or pre-populate those attributes thanks to external data providers. And we go through Encompass, which itself connect to database like Dun & Bradstreet, and we definitely can connect to CSRHub to pre-fill information on ESG. Benefit is to make those data up-to-date, complete, accurate, certified as they should. And another use case, which is typical of the supply chain, is to get to request information from your level 2 or more suppliers. And you can go through your level 1 supplier and ask them to forward a questionnaire to the level 2 or down. And it enables the certifiers, typically the SGS or Bureau Veritas or EcoVadis, to provide certificate to supplier level 2, so that then it's passed through to the buyer. And that's a way to go deep into the supply chain, into level N, to get some clarity or some visibility on your supply chain. Ultimately, if your whole supply chain is mapped, connected, it enables each of your suppliers to control their data, to share it with you, to update it when needed, and ultimately you can put in place your overall supply network map with the right risk control. Now, as a transition to the ESG discussion with Bahar, I think it's very important to remind us that a number of companies have already committed at CEO level on sustainable development goals, which a lot of them have impact on the supply chain and require measurement of the progress. So all of this will require better understanding and better measurement, better monitoring of those KPIs, especially on ESG. And I leave the floor to Bahar from there.
Thank you, Damien. I was invited to join this webinar to provide a practical example of how tools such as CSRHub could help reduce supply chain risk and drive blockchain adoption. Now, I'm sure many of you already know about CSRHub. We've been around now 11 years and have data going back to 2008. Let me just give you briefly what we do so that you'll understand how we fit into this process. CSRHub is one of the world's broadest ESG rating sources. We track now 36,000 entities in 143 countries. We provide a consensus ESG score via proprietary big data algorithm. And I think it's interesting to see big data, another new data processing technology, merge in and support this new blockchain technology. We ingest, we convert, we map, we normalize, we weight, and the result is 12 standardized indicators that cover all aspects of a company's sustainability performance. The breadth of our coverage allows our use across supply chains for industry analysis and in other ways. We ingest Wall Street, NGO, crowdsources, now over 600 different types of data come into our system. And we track both public and private companies. Could you go to the next slide? We recently collaborated with one of the world's leading standards organizations to study the apparel and footwear industry. And I think it's a good example of what we are looking at here in the blockchain journey and in the journey in general of adopting ESG metrics. SASB, the group we worked with, is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It's a US-based organization which has a goal of determining which ESG metrics are material and then specifying how to report these metrics. And we looked at the apparel industry, and the first thing we tried to understand is where is that industry on the life cycle of reporting? Is it in the pre-reporting stage? Is it just done its first reports? Are the companies in apparel aware of standards? Are they applying the standards, or are they finally at integrated reporting? Unfortunately, apparel, footwear companies are in the aware of standards area. They're starting to apply standards, but many of them still are back in first reports. In fact, out of the 1,000+ companies that we track in this industry, only about 398, only 40% of them are companies that we can currently rate. SASB defined 4 key metrics, things that apparel companies should actually report on, and described how they should report on those things. And they included things such as the management of chemicals in their products, raw material sourcing and innovation, and then 2 supply chain related metrics, environmental impacts in the supply chain and labor conditions in the supply chain. But our study showed that the relative level of data disclosure for all of these things was low, and the preparedness to disclose in a manner in accord with the SASB standards, in line with the certification and standards approach that SASB is recommending, was also relatively low. Could you go to the next slide? So if you use a source such as CSRHub to drill down and examine the details of the reporting situation for any subset of companies in this industry, I think you'll find, you'll understand better how this industry looks right now. There are certainly some companies like Adidas, H&M, Nike, that are very high rated, that have done a great job of disclosing their sustainability performance. There are also some that are lower. But perhaps more important is that the level of sustainability reporting, the level of performance is inconsistent. You can see, for instance, that the environment category is fairly well reported by most of the companies and has fairly high scores. But over there on the left in the community area, which includes things like community development and philanthropy, product, and the crucial one we're talking about here, human rights and supply chain, has a very mixed range of rating results. Adidas is doing a very good job in this area, but people like Abercrombie and Fitch, Patagonia, and Canada Goose are lagging behind. Today, an apparel company could already use the CSRHub data to get an outside-in look at its supply chain. We'd expect between 30 and 70% of a company's first-tier suppliers to show up in CSRHub, and perhaps 50 to 80% of its spend to be covered by CSRHub. However, the outside-in look only covers really reputational risk and what's known by everybody else. It doesn't give a detailed supply chain management information data set, the kind of thing that supply chain managers need to look at all of the aspects of how a supply chain is operating. Only a full-fledged blockchain type solution, I think, can provide this inside part of the puzzle. So let's take a look, could you go to the next slide, at a system that's coming out that I think is quite indicative of where things are going. This is the Open Apparel Registry, or OAR, and it's been set up by a consortium of apparel companies, not-for-profit governmental organizations, and also industry groups working together. What they have done is they brought together 117 different contributors of data, buyers for the most part, and those people have identified 31,000 of the facilities that they work with. So we now know where 31,000 apparel industry facilities are geolocated, and we know to some extent which buyers, which industry associations, which NGO and certification groups they work with. So we're starting to get a detailed description of one particular set of supplier relationships, if you remember what Damian was talking about. If you consider then that we know something about the supplier relationships and that CSRHub provide something about supplier risk, you can see that if we had a blockchain solution overlaid on top of this, we could start to talk about a complete supply chain management system. Unfortunately, there are some barriers to progress. While we know which suppliers and buyers are connected, at least for these particular buyers, we don't know anything about what's being purchased. We also have fairly poor standardization of the data that's moving back and forth. I showed you before how low the agreement is between the different groups on their data standards. And there are many privacy and data gap issues. So while we've made progress, and we may soon have the opportunity to build something, we don't yet have exactly what we need to provide both risk management and also supply chain tracking. I think together with opportunities like this, we'll get there. We're still not there. I thought it might be interesting in the COVID environment to mention that one of the things that the OAR has done is it's asked all of the suppliers, all the facilities that do PPE, personal protective equipment, and all the buyers who are buying PPE to separately identify that particular type of supply and that particular type of purchase. And so we are seeing already that it can be used in times of crisis such as ours to add information to what's going on within the supply chain. Damien, I turn it back to you. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Baha. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we picked up the apparel industry because it's probably the most organized as a non-for-profit across the industry, which self-declares those suppliers and locate them, as you can see on the map. So it's a reflection on and it happens across industries, but it's interesting to see how industry can get together, align on what counts for them in terms of ESG criteria, human rights, fair trade, child labor, etc., environmental issues. And that's a combined effort of multiple leaders within the industry, and also everyone on their own have their transformation roadmap to properly connect to their own supply chain. So interesting to see this as a common good, industry by industry. We have reached our time. Let's look at maybe one or two questions, and we are available anyway for follow-up discussions and presenting with either Baha or myself or both of us, and presenting the Blue Cat solution if you're interested, or in discussing any live topic or issue or opportunity that you would see. Questions in the chat. Adrien, do you have any question? If not, I think we can close there. And you'll see, you'll be able to replay that. The replay we'll send to you. Hopefully it was insightful, and we hope to have you on the next webcast next week. Have a great end of the week, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Through the Blue Cat solution, it can be pretty quick. The question of onboarding is really the collaboration with the supplier to provide the information. The solution itself makes it simple, seamless, but it takes time on their side to provide, to fill in the questionnaire. So it really depends on the complexity of the questionnaire. And as I said, once you've done it once, the next answering of questions is much faster because you can leverage a number of questions which have been already answered. So it really depends. It's been designed to make it easy, especially on the second time you answer any question. A few days, depending on the involvement. Definitely faster than the current process.
Another one, is there data model validation between partners to ensure automation, or maybe
Yes.
some templates?
That's an interesting one. We like to leverage on best state-of-the-art industry standards whenever they exist. In the banking industry, there are standard questionnaire happening, emerging. Swift is leading that effort. In the aerospace industry, we see some typical questionnaires, especially on security, quality requirements. So across industry, we see questionnaires emerging as standards. You can think of them as baselines, but the tool was designed, Bluecate's tool was designed to enable the making of any questionnaire with your bespoke questions, the way you would ask them to your suppliers. So it does work also with the right degree of customization as you see fit. So progressively, we see a standardization of questions across industries, but we can start right now using what you have, what any buyer may have already as a standard, and turning it into a digital form. So it's not a requirement to pre-standardize everything.
Okay, that was the last question. I think we can close there. Thanks a lot, Damien and Bahar.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.